This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know.
And we are back with another fabulous episode of Jews You Should Know. This week, what a unique and incredibly dedicated individual. You know, my wife and I just sent our oldest son off to Israel to study about 2 weeks ago. And anyone following along this year will know that it was not a simple process to get young people into the country to go study, and tremendous amount of logistics and involvement. And the person I'm interviewing today, Paysach Freedman, runs an organization called Chaim v'Chesed. And essentially the entire raison d'etre of this organization is to help Anglos in Israel navigate the labyrinthine web of regulations and bureaucratic realities that animates the Jewish state. Of course, it's a wonderful, beautiful place to be and to live, but I think anyone who's been there knows that it has its distinct cultural nuances, and those can be forbidding to an American or other English speaker trying to make his or her way there. And so Chaim v'Chesed, I know, was involved in helping get people into Israel during this time of Corona, but much more broadly, they've done a tremendous amount to assist people who have made Aliyah or otherwise living there long term to deal with all of the myriad issues that come up, healthcare to getting paperwork in order, schooling, finding professions, and so forth. Paysach Freedman, like myself, grew up in Baltimore, and I actually know his brother quite well, who's a colleague of mine doing campus outreach work as well in Atlanta. So we had a number of connections, and I had heard about the organization for a while and really was excited to do this interview. We actually did it much earlier in COVID, and I'm finally getting around to releasing it now, but you'll hear that it's just as relevant as ever, and I think you'll really enjoy. Meanwhile, a reminder to follow us on social media at Jews You Should Know, spelled out fully, on Instagram and Facebook. Jews You Should Know with the letter U on Twitter. Subscribe wherever you're listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever pods are cast. And comments or questions to jewsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. And now to our conversation with Chaim v'Chesed founder and director, Paysach Freedman. We are here with Paysach Freedman, the founder and director of Chaim v'Chesed, which is an incredible organization based in Israel, helping those who have moved to Israel or living there, Americans and Anglos, deal with the incredible bureaucratic web that is the Holy Land. And I'm sure we'll get to all of that. But first of all, Paysach, how are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Paysach, from what little I know about you and your family, at least, I believe you are similarly from the great city of Baltimore, as am I, having grown up there. Tell us a little bit about your background and where it all began.
Sure. So I was born in Baltimore a few decades back, and I did live there until I was about 21 years old, at which time I was actually studying in a yeshiva here in Jerusalem, Israel. I got married in Baltimore and returned for studies back here in Jerusalem, thinking that it would be for about a year or two. And now, fast forward, we're actually living here now for 25 years.
Wow, that's a long time. So growing up, I understand your father, if I recall, was the principal of one of the high schools in Baltimore.
My father was a principal, actually, of Beis Yaakov Girls' School. My grandfather before him was a principal for 35 years. My father, of blessed memory, was a principal for 37 years. But I did not choose that route.
So say, what happened? You missed the boat. Any of your siblings go to that industry?
It just so happens that the current principal is my brother-in-law.
There we go. Shocker. There we go. Beautiful. What was your childhood like in Baltimore? It was a different kind of town, I think, back then, a lot smaller in terms of the Jewish community.
In terms of the Jewish community, I don't even know if it was a quarter of the size back then. I regularly meet people that say they're from Baltimore, and you must know my family. And they say, well, they moved there a long time ago, 20 years ago. I say, well, that was about 5 years after I was out of there. So it's definitely grown by leaps and bounds, the Jewish community, which is a blessed thing. I still obviously have 4 siblings there. My mother lives there. So I am there frequently. So I definitely have connections to the Baltimore community and holds a very dear place in my heart.
Amazing. So when you, obviously, I guess you went to Israel just for yeshiva study, as is fairly typical for young men and women in the observant community to go and to spend some time basking in the spiritual glow of Israel and studying in the great educational institutions there. So many people, most people, they go for a year or 2 years, 3 years, and then they come back, they go to college, they continue their education in the States. It sounds like you chose not to do that and stuck around for a little while over there. What was your path over there, and what kind of grabbed you about Israel?
That's a great question. It was a gradual process because, like I said, we actually came expecting to live here for about a year after the wedding. A year became 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. At a certain point, we said, okay, we're going to have to make a decision if we'd like to establish ourselves here permanently, and eventually we did. Listen, it's definitely the best place for a Jew to live, in my opinion. That's the heartbeat of the Jewish people. Not everyone is able to do it. I understand that. We sort of grew into it organically, like I said, that we were just here on a short-term basis, which became a little longer, I think that definitely makes it easier. As we'll get to, we talk to people about making Aliyah on a regular basis, and I understand it's definitely a huge challenge and a great leap for someone to pick up in midlife, so to speak, established as a family, established in a profession, whatever it is, to move here is not simple. But I was here in studies and just continued the studies and eventually got into a lot of other things, which maybe we'll talk about soon. So it happened in a much, like I said, a much more gradual fashion, which definitely does make it easier than those that sort of make Aliyah cold turkey midlife. But it's not without its challenges, which we'll get to in a little bit. It definitely led me to what I'm doing today.
So you went there married, I guess. Was your wife also, did she have any connection there, or was that just a joint decision?
My wife is also a Baltimorean, as am I. She had studied in Israel for a year. She did have a set of grandparents that lived in Israel, so she had connections. But again, we were definitely an American couple, just trying it out.
Beautiful. So what was your early plans? Just to study there and continue studying in a kollel, in a Jewish institution for married people, to advance their Jewish studies? Did you have any idea of like what you wanted to do over there, or was really just kind of 1 year at a time doing some Jewish study and see what happens?
So our original intent was in fact doing Jewish study. Actually, I worked on receiving rabbinical ordination, which takes a few years, or sometimes could be a more drawn out process. And my goal was to do that. I definitely wanted from a pretty young age to serve the Jewish people in some fashion. That was definitely the background from which I came, but I had no idea exactly how that would go. It's pretty common amongst the yeshiva students, let's say, obtain rabbinical ordination, even if you're not necessarily going to serve as a pulpit rabbi. So I did want to do that. The studies are valuable in and of themselves. I was doing that as a preliminary step towards some form of service to the Jewish people. In my coming years, at a later date, I actually also obtained a master's degree in educational leadership. But at the time, coming to Israel, the goal was really to just absorb a lot of the uniqueness of Israel, as well as doing earning that ordination and becoming a much more knowledgeable and capable Jew.
So obviously, as you said, at some point things changed a little bit, and it looked like this was going to be a longer term engagement in terms of where you were living and sticking around in the Holy Land. What do you think kind of clicked at some point finally? Was it just like, all right, we've been here long enough, we might as well just make it official? Or was there a moment in time where you said, you know what, we really want to hitch our wagon to this place long term, and there's no turning back?
I think it was probably a combination of, like you say, sort of just the momentum of having lived here, but also I'm not sure that there was what you call an aha moment that it all dawned upon us, but really from an early age, I had wished to establish ourselves, maybe live long-term in Israel, but it always looked a little bit daunting, or a lot daunting, and maybe, too much to do. At some point, we decided, we could do this. It's not so complicated. I personally spent many summers here, even as a boy, in Israel. I had family here. So I felt connected to Israel for a very long time, but it was always sort of a vacation spot or a place to visit. And after a number of years of living here and seeing others that were living here successfully, we decided that, this could work.
So once you made that decision, did you start going to, work in some capacity in the broader economy, or did you continue studying? And at what point did you have a sense of where you were going to go in terms of your own career?
Basically, at that point I was still studying, at least a considerable part of the day. I began a few projects simultaneously while I was studying. One of which was started as one group, which became actually a network. At its peak was 18 kollels, which are study groups headed by Rabbi Yitzhak Berkowitz, which studied and taught the laws, the halachot of mitzvot ben adam l'chaviro, which are interpersonal relationships. We started with one group, which then went out and established other such groups of scholars studying and teaching ben adam l'chaviro. We put out a number of books, first in Hebrew and subsequently in English, on those topics. This has morphed into all sorts of other projects, some of which we ran, others which we spun off into other areas. But that was sort of a combination of, I guess we call it, working and learning and studying, because I was actually studying the material at the same time as we began compiling it, putting out books, and subsequently teaching it to others. What that did was, many of those projects are still ongoing today. What that really did was it got me involved in both simultaneously education, spreading Jewish knowledge, and particularly Ben Adam L'Chaviro, which is interpersonal relationships, or the mitzvot of interpersonal relationships, which are a major part of what Judaism is. It's more than 50% of the mitzvot which we observe today are Ben Adam L'Chaviro. A lot of them we do just intuitively. Some of them we know the halachot of, the laws and guidelines, and many others we don't exactly know. So that was a very enlightening experience, and we were privileged to share that with others as well.
It's interesting. I knew about that curriculum, and I heard quite a bit about it over the years. I didn't know that you were associated with it. How did that involvement get started?
I actually spent a little under 1 year in Eshet Torah. They brought in a group of scholars from the Mir Yeshiva to study/teach simultaneously. And at that point, I was introduced to Rabbi Yitzhak Berkowitz and studied under him. Rabbi Berkowitz, as you may be familiar, is a tremendous, world-renowned scholar. But what was less known at the time was that he had a particular affinity and actually expertise in these mitzvot ben adam l'chaviro. For whatever reason, it appealed to me as well. And together with a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Tzvi Muller, who today actually runs a similar program in Michigan, we approached Rabbi Berkowitz and started, like I said, a small program at the time, which grew by leaps and bounds over the next number of years. This is going back to 2001. So
what was your motivation starting such a program?
Great question. I think personally, I knew that this was a valuable part of Judaism. I thought that much of it was overlooked. There are a number of different reasons why that might be so, sociologically and so on. Maybe people focused more on the between man and God mitzvot. Maybe people were aware but didn't know the exact details. Regardless, I felt it was a major area of Torah that needed to be addressed, and we wanted to make a little dent in that.
It's interesting. I wonder sometimes, like you said, sociologically, if there's a lot to be said for some of the rifts that have occurred over the centuries and among the Jewish people, and you speculate whether the focus, the predominant focus in the non-Orthodox denominations on social action, social justice, and things of that nature have made the more traditional movements more suspect or more concerned about being overtly associated with the man-to-man or interpersonal aspects of Judaism, when in fact that's a massive part of the religion. Do you think there's any credence to that theory, or do you have another?
Perhaps there are those that react that way. I don't see it that way whatsoever, because I don't find that the Orthodox world is lacking whatsoever in the man-to-man mitzvot. I'll explain what I think maybe was lacking, but the tremendous amount of chesed, of kindness, of charitable work which is done, it's second to none. Whether it be you look at the Bikur Cholim, the visiting of the sick, or the with assistance to patients in all the major New York hospitals, which are done by mostly Hasidim. Whether it be the fact that every Jewish community has very, very active, charity groups, Tomchei Shabbos, and things like that. Whether it be just even in the interpersonal, just the emphasis on not speaking lashon hara, right, wicked speech, evil talk, and so on. So I don't believe whatsoever that the Orthodox community has any less focus on social action, but perhaps what's more out there is that there is perhaps much more observance of those mitzvot between man and man, and maybe there's an impression that those things override or over
Man and God,
overshadow. Yeah. Okay, and that perhaps may be true, and there may be a misconception that maybe those Orthodox Jews are just concerned about keeping Shabbat or whatever it might be, and maybe come across to those that are, let's say, less familiar with the community as not focusing so much on the interpersonal things. So far as social action, which is frequently interchanged or used in conjunction with a term called tikkun olam. Again, I don't believe that that doesn't exist in the Orthodox world whatsoever. Every day, we actually say that in the Aleinu prayer when we say litaken olam. But what some often neglect is the subsequent words, which is litaken olam b'malchut Shaddai, right, in God's image, right? Social action in and of itself, without a connection to Judaism or a connection to Torah. There's no need to do that as a Jew. You could do that as a member of any religion. But we care to do. We choose to do it in a very divine fashion, and viewing those things as divinely ordained. That might be a difference, which does exist. But again, we could always improve, and it's not a question of who does something better, who does something worse. I do find that the mitzvah ben al-chavero are definitely a point of connection between Jews of many, many backgrounds. I know a number of Orthodox rabbis who actually study with non-Orthodox, whether it be constituents and sometimes even clergy members, and the common ground that they find to study is none other than these mitzvot ben al-chavero, because they're perhaps less daunting or more familiar to people who perhaps don't have that, that high level of observance of all 613 mitzvot. And it's very beautiful that Jews of different backgrounds could connect over it. But again, it's not. I never saw it as something that was missing in the Orthodox community. But on the contrary, we're always looking to improve, in both the mitzvot ben adam l'chavero and ben adam l'makom, mitzvah between man and God. So for some reason or other, this appealed to me, and we took that on, and it did take off.
What did you actually do? So you developed curriculums, you created sort of like, if I recall, like source sheets or sort of like primers on various specific modules within the man-to-man or interpersonal relationships, different units that you then distributed around the world and people could study them and so forth. How did you sort of promote that? And were there programs built around it?
Just like you said, we did make those modules, first in Hebrew, subsequently in English. What they were primarily were taking the mitzvah, any particular mitzvah from its sources in the Torah down to the practical application today in 2020, which is in and of itself an attractive thing for many people who sometimes think that Torah learning might be arcane or out of date. We always discussed, what do you do with the following workplace dilemma or something like that, or interpersonal question like, can you tell a white lie, or whatever the particular topic was, and then start off with such a practical application, then back it up, trace it all the way back through the sources, all the way back to the mitzvah and the Torah, to the verse in the Bible. What we did was we were never looking to simply to paste our name in different places. We prepared curriculums which were malleable, that different groups, organizations, schools, whether it be for children, whether it be for adults, whether it be for more knowledgeable Jews, whether it be for beginners, were able to take that material, study it on their level, and it was a good thing.
What were some of the examples of units that you produced, or maybe that were the most successful or the most interesting?
One of the things I always felt most interesting was the laws of truth and lying. There are a lot of things which people think, oh, it's a white lie, that's all right to do. We discovered that there are many things which are unacceptable. At the same time, there are situations where a white lie is what's called for. If someone asks you a question which perhaps would require revealing personal or discrete information which you have no right to share, sometimes you're actually not permitted to say what we would call the truth. That's one interesting area. Another very, very interesting area, which really has a lot of the underpinnings of many of the other mitzvot as well, is b'tzedek tishpot amitecha, which is judging others favorably. Basically, we always think you're not supposed to judge people. You're supposed to be non-judgmental. And what we really discovered is the Torah doesn't buy that. The Torah knows that every one of us is very judgmental. We always judge people, and there's actually instructions how we should judge people, right? When you see someone, I don't know, hooking up his car with a chain to an ATM machine and stepping on the gas pedal, are you supposed to be non-judgmental and think that he's just trying out his accelerator? Or are you supposed to call the police because probably a robbery is taking place? I think the answer should be obvious once I put it that way. There are other instances where things look more negative and really you need a deeper look and think, oh, I see a clearly Orthodox guy driving in a car on Shabbos, maybe even at a high rate of speed. Did he just decide to throw, to stop being Sabbath observant? Or maybe there's a life and death emergency, and maybe he's a doctor or a paramedic running to a scene, and other issues like that. And those are just two examples, but there are many, many examples in every area of our daily life where we see things taking place. And it could be, with those who are close to us, with our immediate family, with our spouses, and it could be even with strangers. And how are we supposed to look at that? And how are we supposed to relate and then react?
Can you think of any stories from that time or the period, following it that stand out for you about ways that this curriculum was implemented or ways that people's lives were changed by this focus on sort of values-based Judaism in terms of the interpersonal relationships?
I'm not thinking of any stories right now, but a couple of the points I mentioned before were really, really beautiful, in which Jews from very, very different backgrounds were able to actually come together over essentially a piece of Gemara, a piece of Talmud, because, like I said, it was a non-judgmental, non-threatening sort of topic, which is relevant to everybody, which it's very easy to, with our curriculum, to trace right back to a pasuk, a verse in the Torah, and show how that verse, which was given to the Jewish people at Sinai over 3,000 years ago, actually can impact and better our lives here today in the U.S. and Israel, wherever it might be. We found that time and time again, and that's feedback that we always get from people studying that it's really a great connector.
Beautiful. So what happened that it seems like you, I guess, moved on from that project at some point? It sounds like you said that project still exists in some iteration.
The project definitely exists in some iteration, but it's definitely not the focus of what I'm doing today. To put it very succinctly, I guess you could say I stopped teaching Ben Adam L'Chavero and started actually doing some.
I thought you were going to say after you perfected it, you moved on to the higher realms.
If we think we've perfected it, we've got a lot coming to us. It's a constant work of growth. But I don't know if that was conscious, but that's sort of what happened. Actually, we're now involved in, as you can see behind me, Chaim B'Chesed, which is an organization which I run and have been at the helm of for the last 5 years. In 14 days, in July 1st will be our 5th birthday.
Also my anniversary, by the way. Just throwing that out
beautiful. There. Beautiful, gorgeous. Okay.
So so after the J values thing, which with the interpersonal, you started moving in a direction of very, very different. Although really, if you talk about interpersonal relationships and getting in the weeds and in the nitty gritty, this is about as much as you can kind of roll up your sleeves and deal with challenging, unattractive, unglamorous kind of work. The kind of work that I've read about you guys doing is precisely that. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project, Chaim V'Chesed, which literally means life and kindness, which maybe you'll tell us about that origin as well in terms of the name. But where did this all come from? What happened that you started doing work on behalf of people, Americans or Anglos living in Israel and all the ridiculous number of obstacles that they perhaps face.
Okay, so you asked a very excellent question. What was the genesis? Because like most things, nothing happens in a vacuum. While I was involved in the Center of Jewish Values and the B'nai L'Chavera work that we described before, from the approximately 2004, 2005, I also became involved in a great deal of tzedakah work, which is charitable work here in Israel. Without getting into the specifics, I was and continue to be someone involved in a lot of distribution of charitable funds, many of which come from a variety of Jews in the diaspora, many, not all of whom are even observant Jews. And those Jews come with very, very big hearts and with specific things that they were looking for. They wanted to help specific areas of need in Israel. We're talking about women in distress, teenagers at risk, children with cancer, encouraging employment, all sorts of different areas where different benefactors would earmark money for specific projects or groups of people that they wanted to give money for. And I was involved in the administration of those funds.
How did they identify you?
That's a very interesting question, but I had a partner who was involved in it. Was actually a former an Ola Hadash, someone who had made Aliyah from the U.S. He was involved in the world of finance back in the U.S., still had a lot of business dealings in the United States, had a great number of business partners as well as family members who he was involved in a financial fashion. And together they had a lot of stuff going on, and somehow got orchestrated things that we
got roped in, basically.
Yeah, that's precisely what happened. And it was a very, very, very special experience. Some of it I'm still involved in, some of which I'm not. But it wasn't simply, okay, we'll give you some tzedakah money, write a check and give it out to the poor people in Israel. Like I said, they had a lot of criteria, excellent criteria, sometimes challenging criteria. So what we really needed to do was research many of the areas that those donors asked for. Find out who's doing things in Israel to, let's say, encourage employment. Who does work with orphans, who's doing work with children with cancer, all these different areas which they wanted to contribute to, but not simply write a blank check or write a check blindly to some nice sounding organization. What they always had wanted us to do is to research it, look at the, kick the tires, know the nuts and bolts, often give the money directly to the recipients as opposed to just giving it to an organization which would do that. So there was a lot of work which went into it and caused me to learn a lot of different areas. That in and of itself was a lot. And then what happened, stage two was once you get involved, you can't get uninvolved. You cannot unentangle yourself. And the most basic example is you're helping a family, perhaps because they've got a sick child, and all of a sudden that child needs to be treated in a hospital in New York and needs to be flown out of Israel on a medical transport, and they need passports and they need insurance and they need all sorts of arrangements tonight by tonight at midnight. And all of a sudden you start learning those areas of need. You're dealing with a family, and all of a sudden a family member is having a mental health crisis, and you need to deal with the social services, or a child gets involved with the police, and you need to negotiate with the police on their behalf, or again, you're helping a needy family and they land themselves in the hospital, and then you need to deal with them with their medical situation. You have to have a very hard heart to not pick up, run with the next step, even though you maybe were just writing them a check or helping them with one specific topic. But if they call you up in the middle of the night, take it to the hospital, or my spouse needs to be taken to a psychiatric unit, those kind of things, you've got to respond there as well. So I got, for sure, my feet wet, and maybe a little more than my feet wet in a large number of areas of need. Many different disciplines, many connections in different areas. As you probably know, Israel is a country where it's not really so much what you know, but who you know. There's something called protectia, which has no translation into English. But that basically means, who do you know who could help out in this particular case? So I developed a lot of that.
What's interesting is that at this point you had been already living in Israel for quite a while, right? And Israel is notorious for its bureaucratic challenges, especially for for immigrants and, those who didn't grow up there, those who didn't, those who don't have a first cousin, once removed or whatever in whatever ministry it is. So had you encountered your own, bureaucratic challenges or snafus living there, or it had been very smooth for you personally?
I had some, thank God, nothing life-threatening, nothing terrible. I did have a special needs child who was born, which after you thought you mastered the whole system, you had all sorts of new challenges that came up. But basically, it's easy to learn on others' difficulties. Right? When you see someone else suffering, thank God we don't have to suffer, but you want to help that person. And then at the same time, you fill up your Rolodex. You just made that contact in the police department or in an airline or in some airport or other government office. You file that away, which really brings me to what we're doing today with Chaim V'Chesed. The tzedakah work, the charity work which we're involved in, did not focus specifically on Anglos, on English speakers here in Israel, but inevitably I discover what you alluded to, which is to be a newcomer, to be an immigrant to Israel is that much harder. It's not so easy for anybody to live here. Wonderful place to live. I'm all in favor. I wish all Jews will be able to do so. But when you have difficulties, it's really difficult. And if you don't know the language or you don't have those connections or you don't have the mentality, which is really more critical than the even the language, you're really at a real deficit. And if it's a real big problem, then you're at a really big deficit. So going back, like I said, to 2015, myself as well as a couple of others, community members decided that we should really do something to be sort of a umbrella organization and really a one-to address for members of the English-speaking community in Israel. There's a tremendous community of English speakers here in Israel. It's a very, very broad spectrum of people, both in their backgrounds and in their status, whether they're here as visitors, whether they're here as Olim Chadashim, recent immigrants, whether they're people that moved here many, many years ago, tourists. But there's a tremendous amount of native English speakers who have their unique mentality, their unique background, and maybe even their unique needs. If we're talking about a lot of Americans, which we're not limited to, we help British, South African, others as well. But for example, if it's Americans, so there are going to be issues which are relevant specifically to Americans in Israel, whether it be U.S. passports and dealing with the U.S. Consulate, whether it be right now in the stimulus funds which U.S. government gave out, whether it be Israeli Americans living here who have issues with Social Security. There are issues which are specific to them, and the general issues, matters of daily life, which are, like I said, challenging for all and even more difficult if you're a foreigner. So we set out in 2015 to do something about that.
So what were some of the first steps that you did to kind of formalize this enterprise in terms of services that you offered or divisions, so to speak?
So actually, we did it in a very deliberate and organized fashion. We spent the first 6 months. Went down from the day January 1st, 2015 we began, and we opened our doors, like I said, on July 1st, 2015. So that means we had 6 months to the day to basically do research, meet with community members, meet with rabbis, meet with influential government officials at different important points, or what we thought were important points. Try to identify the needs or the difficulties that people have, and at the same time find out what solutions there are. Meaning, are there organizations that deal with specific areas of need? Are there contacts in government ministries who really are tasked with doing X, Y, or Z? Are there issues that no one has a solution for? Maybe we could seek a solution. Basically, it was 6 months of research trying to identify the problems and usually the solutions that were out there. Like I said, that took 6 months, and then we opened our doors.
And what was the first? Yeah, go ahead.
Then we found out that some of the research was spot on. Some of the things that we thought were major issues were not as prevalent as we thought. Other things, and this is more common, many other issues that we didn't dream were going to be so problematic came up. And when that happened, we did and continue to do very, very quick work. I mean, we try to be quick studies to find out the issue, get to the answer. Our motto in many areas is either we know the answer or we know where to get the answer. And that's what's been going on for 5 years. It just has exploded. Today, fast forwarding, you'll take me back to the beginning if you'd like, but today we're actually a staff of 14 members. We, until the beginning of the corona crisis, we're actually taking an average of 100 new cases a day. It's now pushing 200 new cases a day. Every area of difficulty or crisis you can imagine, and quite a few that you can't imagine. There's not a day without some new issue coming up that, wow, we never heard of that before. And okay, we're going to look into it. We're going to try to address it. We're going to find the solution for it.
Okay, so this whole enterprise is beyond fascinating to me, and I have so many questions about it. I'm going to try to be organized here in my pursuit. First of all, just give us an overview. What are the issues that you deal with? I'm sure it's healthcare and mental health, and like you said, travel and passports, and what are there kind of divisions, subtitles? What are some of the unknown or topics that you didn't expect to encounter that really are these larger issues? Give us a sort of an overview.
Okay, so how much time do we have?
We have as long as you want.
Okay, because you just asked me about an hour's worth of work, and I don't know that I could be here for an hour, but I will try to condense it. So far as departments, the way it breaks down is we have what's called the bureaucratic department, we have mental health department, we have a medical and kupat cholim department. Kupat cholim is the health insurance, HMOs, if you will. We have a hospital department, we have a special education department, and we have a women's health department. Those are the major departments. Now, the first one I mentioned is bureaucratic. Bureaucratic can range from anything to do with obtaining disability, from being stuck with an issue with the airline or being overcharged by your cell phone company, from not receiving a passport or trying to get a birth certificate, or trying to get a driver's license, or being evicted from your house because there's a problem with your payment. That's a very, very broad spectrum. We have today 4 people that work in the bureaucratic department. They are constantly, they have certain issues which are frequent, some of which I mentioned, and others which, like I said, you never heard that one before, but it comes up, and that will usually be something that they'll research and try to get the answer. When we get to the hospital department, what that means is we have 3 representatives who actually work for us on the ground in the hospitals. People will call up and say, I'm waiting in the hospital for an appointment, I don't know where to go. Or I'm sitting in the emergency room for 6 or 7 hours and no one's looking at me. Or I'm trying to get what's called a hitchayvot, which is actually a guarantee of payment from my health insurance, and it's just not coming. Or I've got I need a very difficult to get appointment. The doctor says I need to do it in 48 hours. They tell me they'll give me one in 4 to 8 weeks. So our representatives will help clients over there. Sometimes it's just navigating them through the hospital physically. Then we get to the medical system is quite complicated over here and very different to that which foreigners are used to. A lot of it is really just explanatory work, explaining to them what's going on, telling them how they could get what's coming to them. Other times it's things that we need to go to bat for. We need to negotiate with the particular kupat cholim healthcare insurance company for a particular process to be approved or to get a operation paid for or whatever it might be. The mental health department is slightly different, and there we actually do actual mental health referrals to mental health specialists, which we do not do in most other areas. We don't do medical referrals. We simply help with the medical logistics. The special education department is we have 2 women working there, which is a very, very crucial department in which people often will either have children just born with special needs or a child who could have been growing nicely and all of a sudden has a particular problem. They are referred to by their ganena, by their nursery school teacher, or even by at a later point in their educational career that they need some kind of special needs care, special therapy, or whatever it might be. And the average Israeli has a hard time navigating that. Again, the average foreigner has no idea where to turn. There are untold number of approvals or boards or rubber stamps that you need to get. And basically, our special education department guides them through that and advises them on that. In general, the stuff breaks down to 2 areas. That is basically informative and actual hands-on assistance. Informative are many things. Someone says, okay, I just moved here from abroad. I need to convert my foreign license to an Israeli license. So there are a number of different differences. How long you had your license abroad? Did you make Aliyah? What is your status here? But basically, we can answer those questions on the phone. If need be, we send them a guide by email. We also have it on our website. And that's an over and out kind of situation. Other things are a little bit more complex. And we'll explain that as well. And sometimes they'll be back and forth, or something doesn't work, and they'll call us back again, and we'll help them once again. that that is all what we call informative, which is a large portion of the work. A separate part of it is when it's hands-on. Like I said, in the hospital, when someone's in the hospital, doesn't even know where to turn physically, we'll have a representative on the spot dealing with it. Other times, even by phone, whether or not we meet with them in person, but we need to get involved. Someone's not getting approval for a discount that should be coming to them on their property tax, or something we're dealing with today. There are 3 residents of Israel who are not citizens who are having trouble with the education ministry. They're not recognizing their passport number in their system, so they're not able to get the certification that they're supposed to get. So we interface with the government, sometimes pursue different government ministries, at other times need to even create pressure, get other politicians involved if need be, to promote a particular issue, a particular problem that someone's having. So there we're actually helping hands-on with an issue that somebody's having.
How does the government view you? Or do they see you as an ally? Do they see you as a thorn in their side? Oh man, Paysach's calling me again, or one of his staff. You finally got the guy's number in your Rolodex, and then you're calling every 3 days with another case about somebody stuck abroad or somebody with an issue in their health insurance. How do they see you?
It's a very valid question, and it's really not just a question for us as an organization. It's almost something that every person who lives in Israel needs to grapple with as well. Let's say you find yourself in the hospital. You're waiting, and they told you you'll be next, but already 30 minutes have gone by, and they're not calling you in. What we tell people, which is usually the case, you need a mixture of pushiness and friendliness. You need to be a little pushy, and we are in the Middle East. It's a little bit of a rough neighborhood. Whoever pushes their way in or nags the nurse is maybe going to be seen first. At the same time, you can't overdo it. If you're going to be, like you say, a complete thorn in the side, or what we call a nudnik in Hebrew, they're going to send you out of there. So there needs to be a mixture of friendliness and pushiness, and it's very difficult, especially when you're not familiar with the culture, to know exactly what's what. It reminds me of actually one incident that we had when a Kupat Cholim office actually called us up and said, "We've got someone here. Maybe you could talk to him on the phone and talk him down. If not, we're going to have to call the police." He's yelling and screaming. He's yelling and screaming and refuses to leave. So we got on the phone, and it turned out that this gentleman was a recent immigrant who had applied for something in the Kupat Cholim and had been refused. Doesn't matter if he should have been refused or wasn't refused, but he decided that he was being taken advantage of because he's just a new immigrant. And someone had told him that the only way you get things done in Israel is if you yell and scream. Now, that is sometimes true that you got to yell and scream, but you need to know when, where, and how much, and for that matter, how loud. This guy was yelling and screaming, wouldn't leave, thought that that's how you get things done. And like I said, he was about to have the police called, to take him away. We tried to explain it to him in his language, what's going on, how you're supposed to deal with this, why the branch manager that you're talking to is not even capable of dealing with it. And hopefully we helped out with that particular case. Getting back to us as an organization, we don't find that at all. A very large portion of what we do is actually dependent on the relationships that we establish. And if we'd be, like you say, a thorn in people's sides, they wouldn't cooperate with us. We try to establish personal relationships with the various contacts and different government ministries and keep that personal and become friendly with them. Often when they're, in my opinion, when they're smart, they realize that we really could be an ally to them or actually help them out a lot. If this government officer is just getting bombarded by all sorts of clueless, hapless foreigners, not understanding what's going on, and he could explain it once to us, and we can then deploy that information to others, so that would be to his benefit. And we try to explain that to, whether it be to healthcare insurance companies, whether it be to government offices, that, listen, if you could give this to us in clear, in writing, fix this problem, close this loophole, we'll be able to, you'll have a better time of it as well. And that really is what we find very often. We try to make them our ally. We try to explain that to them. Sometimes it takes them a few times till they realize that. And it works. The system works.
What's the name Chaim V'Chesed? Why did you choose that particular name?
Well, Chaim V'Chesed, like you said earlier, does mean life and kindness. But it refers sort of to the fact that we provide chesed, which is kindness or assistance, in every area of Chaim, every area of life. So like you'll see from our logo right behind me, you'll see actually right in the middle of that compass is the state of Israel right there, and the idea being that what we're doing is being a compass, giving you guidance to sort of navigate in Israel.
Is there overlap with other organizations that, without getting too political, but, for example, something like Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is designed to help people make Aliyah, and from my understanding, to help learn about the hurdles involved in Aliyah and helping with employment and placements in different aspects of life, medical and otherwise. Where is the overlaps and where are the gaps, and how do you interface, if at all, with other organizations that may be out there?
That's a fantastic question, and it's actually something that, rather than being a problem, we've made into a tremendous asset. You mentioned Nefesh B'Nefesh. It's a fantastic organization. We work very closely with them. And I'll give you, we'll use that actually as a springboard. Nefesh B'Nefesh's main mission is to bring the Jews to Israel. Okay, and they help people make Aliyah, do an amazing job of it. They obviously know that it's not so easy once you get here, and therefore they provide various support forums once you get here. However, it's not really their job to hold your hand through everything once you're here, through daily life. Certainly not after you're here for a number of years. You wouldn't call Nefesh B'Nefesh when you're stuck in the hospital and nobody's looking at you. You may call Nefesh B'Nefesh when you're first getting here and you have a problem with your Aliyah papers. And Nefesh B'Nefesh appreciates what we do, and we appreciate what they do. So, for instance, when we get calls about, I'd like to make Aliyah, we just say, here's the number of Nefesh B'Nefesh. I'd like to know which rights, which is zchuyot I'll have when making Aliyah. Speak to Nefesh B'Nefesh. Someone says they're having trouble with reaching Nefesh B'Nefesh, or it's after hours and they have an emergency needing Nefesh B'Nefesh, we could help put them in contact with Nefesh B'Nefesh if need be. But that's really Nefesh B'Nefesh's expertise. At the same time, we actually have frequent contact with Nefesh B'Nefesh that they'll contact us. Either they'll refer someone to us, or they will actually pick up the phone and say, listen, we have this kind of interesting complication. Do you think you guys would be the ones to help in this case? And they'll send things over to us. Nefesh B'Nefesh is probably the most commonly asked area, but there are many. Israel is a land blessed with milk and honey and Jewish organizations. And there are many organizations that do different pieces of work that we have a connection to. And we actually make it our business to get to know those organizations, actually on a personal level as well, and figure out how they can help us and we can help them. Meaning, there's an organization called Ezer Mitzion. Ezer Mitzion is a medical support organization. They happen to do many, many things. A lot of what they do is actually not even known to the public, which maybe they should message better. But a lot of the things which they do, we're able to, when we get a call, we could say, oh, that's something that Ezer Mitzion has a department for. And not only that, the head of that department is an American, is an English speaker. We could either just give you their number, or perhaps we'll even connect you with him. At the same time, Ezer Mitzion deals with, one of the departments that they have is mental health. And they sometimes will have someone who's having a problem getting his mental health benefits because he has a problem with his citizenship or with his Bituach Le'umi, which is his national insurance. And that's something that we're very involved in. So when we make them aware of what we do, they're able to tell this person who's getting stuck, oh, call Chaim V'Chesed, they'll sort that out for you. We're dealing right now actually with a major nursing home who has a patient in the nursing home who is not an Israeli citizen, but he is an Israeli resident, and it's not usually the kind of situation that they deal with. But he is eligible for rights, so they keep having trouble getting his rights, his benefits from the government, and we are basically doing the backup for them. Whenever they run into a brick wall, we have our contacts in Bituach Le'umi or other governmental offices, which sort it out for them. I view it as a blessing to have so many organizations, but we've got to know who does what and work together. There isn't that much overlap because, with the exception of Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is frequently asked, nobody's really servicing the Anglos, certainly not servicing the Anglos specifically. But it's in everybody's best interest that we work together, and a lot of beautiful things come out of that.
Just the last couple of questions. First of all, how are you guys funded? Is it all private donations? Are you getting any government support at this point?
So the vast majority of it is private donations. That's been the case for most of the 5 years. We just got approved in the past year for a certain government funding, but it's not all that significant. We're actually applying for more because I believe that the government should be funding us
100%.
Not just simply because it will make my job better, but really because we are
You're saving them a lot of money and time.
Exactly. We're doing a lot of the work, whether it be the PR work, whether it be the explanatory work, whether it be helping tourists, whether it be helping Aliyah. We're classified now as a Irgun Ma'udid Aliyah, an Aliyah, an organization which encourages Aliyah. And I wish they would recognize that a little bit more. But we're not going to wait for them, and we keep doing what we need to do. Fortunately, we've had generous donors, benefactors who recognize what we do is important. Sometimes it's people that have actually benefited from our services, so they could relate it directly. Other times we've helped their family members, and sometimes it's people that we haven't helped at all, but simply value Jewish settlement in the state of Israel.
All right, the last couple of questions over here. What would you say is the strangest request that you've ever had to address for a constituent, for a client?
That's a hard one, but I mean, what comes to mind right away is the young lady who called, newlywed, living here, who had no idea what to do with the dogs that were entering wild dogs. Were entering her backyard and had no way to get rid of them. That's been one of them. That would rank. Strangest, we don't deal so much with strange, we deal more with the tragic. Whether someone who passed away over here in a hotel room and we need to find his next of kin, we need to get him identified. Sometimes we need to get a body flown from the diaspora into Israel, or sometimes fly someone back from here who needs to be buried abroad. Other kinds of real heartrending crises, hopefully sometimes with happy endings, unfortunately, not always. I do remember how my children asked me at an early stage of the game how many deaths I was present for. I used to remember every one. Unfortunately, now I can't keep track. A lot of people, even right now during the current corona crisis, wanted to get into Israel just to say goodbye to their loved ones who were on the verge of passing. Sometimes there were miraculous turnarounds, and they got into Israel and were able to not be here for a funeral. That's definitely some of the times that make us happy. We've had number of reproductive issues, women's health issues, where there were some serious challenges. We actually have someone yesterday morning who was operated on in Boston, a baby that we accompanied actually from before that baby was born. From the 5th month of pregnancy, they identified troubles, and that baby was flown actually by private plane a couple of weeks ago to the U.S. was operated yesterday in Boston, hopefully in a life-saving process. So we were happy to have a hand in that, and we'll be really happy to welcome that kid back healthy to Israel. Again, I don't know if so many are strange, but there's a lot of.
It's a good segue because I was going to ask you what your most
tragedies and some tragedies avoided.
Well, I was going to ask you as a final question, what perhaps maybe your most touching story is, or most memorable kind of vignette.
It probably is the story which we got exactly 1 year ago. If I'm not mistaken, it was in June, when on one clear morning we got sent pictures of a baby and pictures of a bris that had taken place earlier that morning. Circumcision had taken place. At first, I just saw the pictures and I hadn't read the text attached. And I said, "What's this all about?" Turned out that several months previously, we had been asked to help a woman arrange an abortion, which, as a religious Jew, is not something that we would do on a regular basis. It was actually a situation where a woman in her 20th week of pregnancy had discovered that there was a serious problem with the child. There was halachic sanction. There are certain circumstances, rare circumstances, under which an abortion is permitted by Jewish law. It was probably the first time that I was actually asked to help me get an abortion. What was taking place at that time was that Israel does allow abortions under certain circumstances, but there is a complicated process, approvals and so on, that need to be followed to obtain that abortion. And there was a doctor in one hospital that needed to sign off on it, and a board in a different hospital that needed to give their approval, and so on and so forth. It didn't seem like it should be that difficult for us, and we thought, okay, once we saw that it was something that was medically needed, halachically sanctioned, so unfortunately we have to help in such cases just as much as in helping births or other happier occasions. For some reason, it just didn't go for us. And a lot of times we see that, we have extraordinary assistance from God, and here it just wasn't going. Couldn't figure out why. Something that should have taken 2 days. I recall that we were on our 9th or 10th day of trying, and the top doctor ended up being on vacation. And afterwards, he was called inadvertently on his vacation, so he got very angry, didn't want to see them. All sorts of strange complications kept happening. Subsequently, what happened was she finally arrived for the abortion, and the protocol calls for on the last step actually is after they've already had 2 fetal MRIs and this many ultrasounds or whatever it was, that another ultrasound be done before the abortion be performed. The ultrasound was done, and the technician ran out of the room and came back with the top doctor. And she says, "There's some mix-up over here." So what are you talking about? Says, "Well, this is not consistent with the previous ultrasounds." Okay, what had been said was that the baby basically had no brain function, and what they were seeing on the ultrasound was that this doesn't match. And the dire circumstances which were previously described, that's not what's going on over here. Okay, abortion's canceled for now. Okay, it was supposed to take place that morning. Subsequently, the doctor said, "Listen, it's not exactly like we thought, but it's still definitely going to be some serious brain damage there. It's not going to be a healthy child. Maybe the child could survive. Originally, we thought that the child wouldn't be able to survive, but definitely still something that you should do." And she was advised to go forth with the abortion. After this whole mix-up, whatever it was, this is not our involvement, but she decided she's going forth with the pregnancy, and the abortion will not take place. Okay, end of story. We had done what we had to do. Thought we would never hear from her again. I think that was in March. In June, X amount of months later, the baby was born, 100% healthy. The bris took place on the 8th day, and those are the pictures of the healthy baby boy that we were looking at. So it's actually a pretty unusual situation, because what we were trying to do was actually help make that abortion happen, and we did not succeed. But I would say that's one of our more successful endeavors. We tried, it schlepped out for a number of days until it subsequently and ultimately didn't happen, and here were the happy results.
You said there's been a major uptick during coronavirus. Just tell people a little bit about what you're doing to help Americans or Anglos abroad, and then finally how people can learn about Chaim V'Chesed if they want to contribute, if they want to reach out for help themselves, and so forth.
Okay, so it's obviously been a crisis around the world, and Israel has not been spared in any which way, so far as shutting down the economy and causing great difficulties to people, whether it be for travel, whether it be for work purposes, employment, and so on. All those things are challenges here. And once again, when there are challenges, the challenges are magnified when you don't know what's going on, when you're away from home, when you don't know the language, and so on. Some of the major issues at the beginning of the crisis were really foreigners here in Israel who wanted to get out, or how they could get out, what they could do. Subsequently, there were issues like unemployment. The state of Israel did provide all sorts of benefits to employees, but it was very hard to access them. If you are a foreigner without Israeli citizenship, it became that much more difficult. We helped with that. There were also issues that we needed to advocate for the government. There are many people that live here with valid visas to be in the country who are not citizens, and when those visas expire, you must renew it. What do you do when the government office is shut down? You would subsequently lose your health care, lose all sorts of benefits. We advocated and actually got the Interior Ministry to extend those visas till June 30th. Those issues with driver's licenses, foreign driver's licenses from abroad, we helped with those issues. Now what's been going on for the last month and a half is foreigners who want to get back into Israel. Israel's borders are still largely closed, but there are many that live here who want to get back to their homes, but they're not citizens. We worked for weeks with the Interior Ministry to try to arrange a process, and we have arranged that. There always are hiccups. Just this morning, I spent a couple of hours on the phone with United Airlines, actually giving them a written protocol, which they should know over in Newark to know which people should be allowed onto the plane to fly to Israel, which not. We're constantly dealing with, even in the middle of the night, people that get bumped off a flight who should be allowed, who shouldn't be allowed, people needing to come here for a sick relative, or maybe for a funeral, or people on the other end of the spectrum having a wedding of a grandchild who's an Israeli citizen, but the grandparents want to come and they're not Israeli, getting them into the country. I mentioned earlier stimulus funding for U.S. citizens who are living abroad. They were able to get it, and really just explaining the whole situation to people. Right now what's going on, we just actually posted. People coming back from abroad have to quarantine for 2 weeks, and that quarantine is a lot different than quarantine in a U.S. state. There's a lot of misconceptions. So the headline, which I see right next to me, is quarantine exemption misinformation. There are certain exemptions you could get from quarantine, but there's a lot of false rumors going around about that. So we need to interface with the health ministry, find out what is legitimate and what is not, and then post that and deploy that information. We, from, I believe, March 15th, moved our whole staff into remote working. They've been working from home. We didn't miss 1 hour of work, and we've actually been working mostly overtime. Our caseload has almost doubled, and there's no end in sight. There's always new twists and new complications. And our goal is to be here for the community, to serve them, and be able to address those needs, whether on an individual basis or advocate on a communal basis. You asked how people get in touch. The best way is definitely to visit our website, which is www.chaimvchesed.com. To contact us in Israel, it's 072 Chesed. It's 072-243-7733. Right now, we're actually preferring that people contact us through email because the phone lines are just collapsing. The email would be to send it to support@chaimvchesed.com or on the contact form on our website. And you mentioned contributions. We're happy to take them. You can do that on our website. Donate. We're happy to accept them.
There we go. Paysach Freedman, Chaim Vchesed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.